As I said, after the passing away of our great king Litunga I in 1916, the throne was given to his first son, Litunga, who became Litunga Yeta III. Like many other royal households and monarchs, sometimes when you become a king, they give you a particular name. Litunga himself had other personal names, including Ruvos. But after some time, he became formally known as Litunga I. He was not Litunga before that. Yeta was Litia Litunga, Litia Marikana Litunga, many other, a few other names. But when he became a Litunga, he became Litunga Yeta III. He was Yeta III because in the 400 years history of Barostan, there had been two other Litungas under the name of Yeta. There was Yeta the first and Yeta the second, and when he came to the throne, it became Yeta the third. Litia Litunga, who became Yeta the third, was born in June 1871. This was only 7 years after the liberation of Barosland from Basutu occupation. The Basutus, who are better known as Makoro, had ruled Barosland from the mid-1830s until 1864, which means that by the time Yeta was born, Barosland had been liberated for 7 years. By the time Yeta was 7 years himself, his father had become Litunga in 1778. 1878. Thank you very much. Please continue correcting me because we are sticking to the record. So feel free to correct anything and add anything as I speak so that we have a complete record. So his father became a Litunga when he was only 7 years old in 1878. 6 years later, there was a revolt against his father. So that at the time he was about 7 years old, 13 to 7 years old, his father, who had become a king, was the victim of a coup attempt. We can call it an attempt because under 1 year later, he came back to his throne. And when his father saw one of the early, very serious experiences that make up his character, his knowledge base, his experience base, was to experience your father being overthrown by rebels and having to escape from the palace. When his father escaped from the palace, you know, according to our custom, according to our tradition, boy children, unless they are still babies, over the age of 10 or 11, cannot sleep in the palace because the palace is not a family house. So boys, after you are 11 years old, even if your father is the king, you have to live elsewhere in what is much closer to being a family house. So when his father was overthrown, which was in the middle of the night, when the attack came to the palace, his father, by the way, the Induna from Sidiko might be interested, that As he found his way out of the palace, he had to break through the wall because the official gates into the palace were blocked by crowds that wanted to kill him. One of the people who was with him was a Mushigurugwe, Mu'ila. So when he left the palace, he was in the company of one other person, an Ila person. And meanwhile, wherever his son was sleeping or resting or whatever, he woke up. He couldn't, of course, go and check in the palace. He could see that there was havoc there. But somehow, he managed to get out of the royal village, and within the same night, they were able to meet with his father. So you can imagine in a young man's lifetime what that experience means, particularly someone who is going to be a future leader. Because you could be a leader who thinks that once you're a leader, it's your seat, it's a meeting field, a pleasure with no dangers except pleasures. But if you are born to endure these experiences, they go towards molding the type of leader you are going to have. A leader who understands that the throne is not something to be taken for granted. That the throne belongs to the people and they can overthrow you from their throne. So that lesson you was able to experience it, and learn it by the time he was 14. Then during the months that followed, he was with his father. They were later joined by Ngambela, Silumbu, Akapelwa. Silumbu is his praise name because he was a great warrior. All our historical heroes were warriors. He was one of them. He also found his way out of the village. When he got out of the village, he assumed that if he was going to escape from this village, he would go back to his own personal village in the north. Where Yeta actually was born in 1871. Kana mungu waliwanga tu. Nikapaela, a village which was Lewanika's personal village. It's in the north, on the way towards Lukulu. And it is there that Lewanika was given some of his earliest royal duties to take custody of some special cattle breeds that belonged to Litunga Spopa, who was the first Litunga after the restoration of Barotla. So that the Ngambela started going there, but before he got too far, I don't know how, the people he bumped into him were able to tell him that no, he has not come in this direction. So he went back and finally met Luanika together with this Ilaman and his son Litia. Then they crossed the Zambezi.
So the Ila you are talking about are the Ila from
Mashugulumbwe.
And the southern province.
Southern province didn't exist. Zambia didn't exist. Kimushukulumwe fell just east of Kapua. Because as Africans, we must understand that our countries were not made by white people. Huh? There are many people say, oh, in 1916, the Zambians did and this. How could they be Zambians in 1916? So we have to be correct. In 1884, there was no Zambia. There was no southern province. What the Barosis knew was that there is a river but there's an Ila name for it. Kapua is just a confusion of words. But this Ila man came east of what is now the Kapua River. Perhaps Namwala, perhaps Mala, near Namwala. And so we were joined by the Angambela. They crossed at a place called Lilelelo, Liyoyelo, which is still here just near the bridge. And then they went all over. They went up to the northeast, came back again into Angola, came back, went to the Mashi area, the Shangombo area of today, went all the way up to the southern tip of Barosiland, which includes Vinyati, which is now in Namibia. So they managed to be there. And within that period of leaving the throne,
Here was 13 years, not 14.
13 years. I was saying between 13 and 14 in the end. That was, thank you very much. So it was 13 in 1884.
Was born 1871.
Yes, June. So that, but the Luanka only left the throne for under a year. So in 1885, he was brought back to the throne, which is also another lesson. That Luanka could not have been brought back to the throne on his own personal strength, without the will of the people, without people prepared to die for him. Indeed, his Prime Minister, Sulumbu Akapelwa, who by the way is my relative on my father's maternal line, died in the last battle, which although won by Luanika forces, the field marshal leading that died, just like the field marshals on the opposite side, Womata and Company also died. So that's how Luanika came to the throne. So for the young, I want us to focus on Yeta as a young man, experiencing all these things. So by the time he was 14, he had been back to Nyengo, where his father was born and where his grandfather, together with other sons of Mulambas, had escaped to come up from out of central Barosland, which was captive, which was occupied. He had gone into Angola. He had gone into Mashi. He had gone up to Vinyati by the time he was 15, and then came back with a martial force, a popular militia, which put his stand. So that is another experience that goes to building him. The loss of his father's throne, the regaining of his other's throne, so that after the age of 15, he was bright enough to have a very clear understanding of the world of politics, the world of royalty, the world of governance, the world of social relationships, human being management. And when his father came back to the throne in 1885, under these circumstances, as we said in the last presentation, these years, 1884, when he was overthrown, up to 1885, when he came back to the throne, coincides with what I think even the Zambian schools seem to be quite free to teach you, the Scramble for Africa meeting in Berlin, which started at the end of 1884 and resumed in the beginning of 85. So that one, he had been overthrown and reinstated in a state of internal conflict. He was reinstated in a world in which the Europeans have resolved to occupy Africa. So the scramble for Africa among Europeans, which means when he came back to the throne with his son, watching and observing and learning and taking notes, he needed to manage internal conflict, as well as marshal up protection against external forces led by European occupiers. So that after he came back, his major mission were those two: how to establish stability, peace, and tranquility among the Barotse, and how to make sure that Barotseland survived even the onslaught of European colonialism. In the national anthem that we sang, there is a very critical verse. In fact, there are verses which apply to both parts of our program today. One part says, Alukunyuhile, Aluiketile, Chiliwanika. That now that we have survived, now that we have peace, is on account of the legacy from King Noah. The other part, which is relevant to the second part of our program, under the theme of one household, one garden, is saying that although Barotseland may not have all these wonderful things we have heard about in other parts of the world, if we have the river, if we have the forest, if we have the land, kulu na kulu likai, to us it is sufficient.
Self-reliant.
So that is the two pillars of our mission in which this program goes along. So from 1885, Rwanda was pursuing those two programs: internal stability and security, and external protection. So that after 1884, Yeta was quite a very experienced young man, observing the struggle of choices of policies that were taking place in the government of his father. They were taking note of the examples of how other African kingdoms are responding both to their own internal conflicts and this external menace which is against all Africans. He was aware how, despite opposition, Liwanика said, if we follow the example of the Tembos in Cape Town, the Xhosas in Cape Town, the Shakas in KwaZulu-Natal, we may lose our kingdom like them. In any case, they are the neighbor here who had moved from South Africa to the very banks of the Zambezi to establish Matabeleland. They have made different choices of how to respond to internal problems and to external threats. The tactics they used led to the fact that today, when you say, where is Matabeleland, you'll be hard put to find where it is. The tactics that Liwanика chose, that Kama Wamangwato chose, that Mushwesho Amasutu chose, is what makes it possible for you to answer that question. That after these Europeans came, where is Barotseland? It is here. It has survived. Where is Lesotho? It is there. It has survived. Where is Bungwato Botswana? It is there. It has survived. Many other African kingdoms have died, have been wiped out. So these are some of the lessons that Yeta grew up learning and picking on. The preference for diplomacy, the smartness not to pick up wars with a spear in hand against people with guns. It's well done. Because sometimes if you pick up a spear and run after someone with a gun, some foolish Africans will think you are more African nationalist, you are more militant, and then your country will be wiped out. So he learned that. And all this went to play with how he ruled once he took over from his father. Not only this experience that I'm talking about, but his father made sure that he was exposed to other things. So by the early 1990s, Litia and his age mate, who later became Ngambela Mukama, were sent to King Kama's capital in Botswana, Yamangwa, to study how they are living with this in this white invaded place, how they are living with education, how they are living with missionaries, what new things are they doing, how are they administering themselves. So he had a course, a comparative course of how Mangwato in Botswana were doing. He also, together with the father of Arthurwina and Scottawina and Musawina, he had also been sent on a mission later on to participate in tax collections once the colonial system had advanced in Namwala, in Monze, and other parts east of the Kafue. So he was exposed in that side also. Then in 1994, because by that time, a lot of traffic was coming from the south of Europeans. So the Barroso government decided that they must have a stronger representation at the southern border. And Yeta was sent to head the regional principalities headquartered at Kazungula, which was the gateway to Barroso. So he became a head of the regional principalities based in Kazungula in 1894, when he was 22 years old. I had mathematicians with me. No, 23 years old. Then in 1908, as you know, the missionaries that came to Barroso in the 1880s came from Lesotho. Often we say that Christianity was brought into Barroso by French. That is not quite correct. It was brought into Barroso by Basotho. They are the ones who demanded, having become Christians themselves, that they themselves wanted to be missionaries to other African parts. And they partnered with the French when they came here. But those who write history, because they see white people and don't see black people, they hardly ever mention them. Fortunately, there is this book which highlights the fact that it was a joint mission between the Lesotho Evangelical Church under Basotho natives and the French Paris Missionary Society under Collier that brought the change. So that by 1908, this church had established itself in Lesotho for 50 years. And King Lewanika was invited to be present at their 50th anniversary. He sent his son Litia to represent them. I was going to ask my comrades to read the passage, but perhaps it prefers that I summarize it. That when he went to that 50th anniversary of the church in Lesotho, the Sothos had welcomed Christianity 50 years before. Barroso had welcomed Christianity 20 years before. So the missionaries, there is a book in which it's related that the missionaries were beginning to complain that although they had made advances towards Christianizing Basotho, and particularly Christianizing the Basotho leadership, at the 50th anniversary, they were noting that some of these leaders, who had become very good Christians, were becoming renegades. They were now taking on wives, everything white missionaries don't approve of, drinking and so on. So an observer at that meeting noted the remarks of the missionaries complaining about this unbecoming behavior by Basotho chiefs and Basotho princes who had earlier been very good Christians. Then they also noted, by contrast, Prince Litia stood out as a complete contrast. He was sober, he was able to speak properly, carry himself with dignity. And as you know, that is related to the fact that the first wedding, Barossi wedding, in a Christian church was the wedding between Litia and his first wife. So at that time, he was still a very good boy in the church. And he was being exemplified as the exemplary that we need future African leaders to be Christian like Yeta. That is 1908. That's also his experience. He had further experience that in 1910, when in 1909, all Africans should understand, the British decided to give so-called independence in South Africa to white settlers and settle the war between these two white tribes, the Boers and the British in South Africa, the so-called Boer War, by constituting a union of South Africa of 4 provinces, 2 British provinces and 2 Boer provinces in 1909, neglecting all the Africans. So King Lewanika, working together with the other kings in Southern Africa, with the support of the African intellectuals, African church leaders in South Africa, they complained about the formation of the Union of South Africa. They looked at it as a union of white tribes against them. So a movement was started to form a union, and in 1900 was sent on a mission to go and officially open the parliament, the first parliament of the South African Union. And during that trip to there, he decided to come and see Musotunya. Because by that time, 1910, the railway line had crossed, the bridge had been made, had crossed in the Litunga. They had in fact reached Ndola. So he was able to come by train from Cape Town up to the Litunga. King Lewanika was invited to meet him, because that same prince, apart from having opened the white South African parliament, was also the future Governor General, the future High Commissioner of the British to South Africa. So he was invited to meet him in Livingstone. He went with Yeta, and Yeta's younger son, younger brother, Mwanangono Masiku, who became Umiko. They were there, so he experienced that exposure. There's a picture, sometimes I've seen these pictures posted in Facebook, like Lewanika at the opening of Zambia's first parliament. One, we have already said that there was no Zambia. 2, even Northern Rhodesia had no parliament. It is just that the Queen's Victoria's son had come to open a parliament, not here, but in Cape Town. And up to now, Cape Town is the house for parliament in South Africa. So they visited. That was also an experience that he had in terms of diplomacy and so on. He was exposed to that. So 6 years later, when his father died, this is the background experience that he brings to the throne. And he takes over the throne when, in response to the general threat from Europe, the government of Barosland's strategy was to befriend at least one of the European parties, preferably the strongest among them, and make a deal with them to protect the survival of Barosland, the survival of internal self-rule of Barosland, and protect him from other European predators, German Portuguese. But in 1914, this faithful partner was in a state of war, and Luanika's health is deteriorated considerably after 1914 until he passed away in 1916. With the question of whether or not the big protector of Barosland is going to win or lose the war, and what happened. So that's the dilemma he inherits. And this dilemma also revived some of the internal conflicts, because once the protector was seemed to be in danger, then the old argument into under the carpet start trying to find their way. So that is how that is the state in which he came to the throne. After the war, that the Germans lost, I should have said that while Yeta was in charge of Kazungula area, the southern part of Barosland, he was later shifted to Mwandi and Sheke, where it is now. So while he was in charge of that, it included the other side of the river, which is now which later became the Caprice. Now they call it Zambezi province in Namibia. But in the lead up to the war, very early, maybe in fact, even before 1900, the British and Germans were negotiating to give away part of Barosland to buy peace with the Germans. By 1909, they made a deal and cut off not only part of Barosland, but part of the territory, the territorial principality that Yeta had been charged to take into German hands. In 1921, Yeta and his Ngambela and Saminduna and his secretary and interpreter, his younger brother Akashamba Twaliwanika, not me, I wasn't there. I know I look old, but I wasn't there, it's not me. Akashamba Twaliwanika was one of, in fact, was the first black person north of Limpopo to get a certificate of full matric, to finish secondary school and ready for university. He would have gone to Fort Hare, except that Fort Hare had not yet been opened. So when he had gone to Labdale, no, he had gone to Zomblom College, while his elder brother Monawina had gone to Labdale in Cape Province. These are very important schools in the history of Southern Africa, because this is the same Labdale where Mbeki's father, Thabo Mbeki himself, where Mandela, where Tambo, where Butelezi, where Mswati's father went to school in Labdale and Zomblom College. So Akashambatu had been a graduate of Zomblom College. They came back in 1914.
And that's when he received that it should know it should not have been accepted. The head is already open for them.
Yes.
Open 1950. But they will not accept it because they are not accepting it.
In the first class. Okay, fine. So noted. So, but he came back now together with Manawina, they became the secretaries under Imwiko, who was then, of course, not known as Imwiko, Massive. So the three of them were manned the secretariat of their father. So when Yeta took over from his father, Imwiko went and to replace him in Mwandi, in the southern principalities of Baraka, based in Mwandi, so that Mwanawina and Akashambaka remained the leaders of the secretariat. But the main interpreter, because Mwanawina had gone to Labdale, but he had only managed to get a certificate, a junior matric certificate, which later maybe in Northern Nigeria would have been called Form 2. Maybe now it's grade 9. But Akashambaka had gone to what is maybe 6th form or grade 12, and so he had finished secondary. So that when Yeta in 1921 went to Cape Town, he took with him his younger brother, my father. He took with him his sons, Kaluwe, and other princes who were going to school in Lovedale and in Zomblom College. But the main mission was to meet the Governor General of South Africa, who was also in charge of Barosiland together with Bechuanaland and Basutoland and Swaziland. And this is why these territories are referred to as the High Commission territory, because they were not part of the Union of South Africa, but they were under the British administration of the British High Commission based in Cape Town. The most important part of that were two, the agenda of that meeting. One was to continue the demand that had existed from 1890, that Barosiland does not want to be ruled by a company, the British South African company. In Zambian history, there is a distortion, as if the Barosis loved the BSA company, they were the friends of BSA companies, they were the puppets of Baros. The Baros government was at the forefront of fighting against company rule, of fighting against British South African company as an agent of the British government. So that was also an agenda.
Now, while you are still there, I will take you back to our research. What I wrote. Let me take back to 15 and there was an agreement on it, where there was an agreement between the Litunga and also the agreement stated according to itself.
Okay.
Maybe you can also shed light on that.
Yeah.
For the purpose of us guiding our children.
I'll make reference to that. I didn't go into details of that because that is really the reign of. I was just speaking because our focus is Yeta's reign. I was just speaking his background, but that's important. The Lokna agreement, there's always a lot of reference to the Lokna agreement because this was a development after 1889, 1890. Although it was signed, it was never implemented. And the reason it wasn't implemented was one of the reasons it wasn't implemented, because the Barosis wanted to be doubly assured that they have not signed the protectorate agreement with the company. And so that actually the negotiation over the Barosi agreement with the British takes place over a 10, in fact, you could say a 20-year period. The critical agreement that was really signed with agreement was in 1901, and it had to be signed in Livingston. And this superseded all the earlier agreements. And but that also there was a dispute from day one over its interpretation, its implementation, because the attitude is that these agreements were, but not giving the country to companies, and not giving the right to self-government to companies. So that from the very beginning up to 1964, all the discussion between Barroso government and the British government was based on the Barroso asserting themselves that they have not been colonized, they have a right to rule themselves, and that what is allowed is what they agree with, like how many Europeans can come here. This is the part of Africa where there was actually a great limit on Europeans coming here, and so on. So that basically that is like part of the Anika story. Although it continues, as I say, up to 1964, the debate over those agreements and their interpretation, because the British were interested in taking advantage of this agreement to broaden their interference in Barroso government and to subordinate Barroso land to a degree that Barroso land has been resisting up to today. So that Yeta's agenda to make sure that we get rid of the BSA company, to make sure that we revert to a direct agreement with the British colonial office, to make sure that the internal self-rule of Barroso land is maintained, and that we have our relationship with the British administrator is very well captured in the Lozi Swana phrase, that these British administrators, Kiva Busisi, we ourselves, Luvabusi, that we are the governors of our own country. The British administrators are there to assist us to rule more or less like consultants based on our agreement to their powers and so on. So Yeta inherited the struggle to clarify that. And the meeting in Cape Town, including clarifying that, first by taking out the British South Africa, establishing a relationship with the colonial office on a basis that's acceptable for us. But these were continuous. I'll go that, then the second part of the agenda of the 1921 meeting was to demand the return of the Caprivi to Barroso. The British ended up refusing because after the Boer War, the Boers and the British in South Africa had made peace.
So the Caprivi is now the Katimamoniro.
Well, we have Katimamoniro on both sides. The Caprivi is now the southern bank of the river at Sicheke, up to Linyati, which I said when he went there. In fact, that was the second time he went there, because even as a younger man who came with his parents, they had also reached Linyati. But that we covered that last time in their history. So that, but following up what you are saying, that these are continuous. In 1936, the British basically what they call the Loga indirect rule system is actually copied from the Barroso agreement with the British. And therefore, in 1936, they wanted to introduce indirect rule to other parts of what is now Zambia, outside Barroso. So what is one of the key lessons, points that needs to be highlighted is that to do this, they passed two laws. One law was to establish native authorities in the rest of Northern Rhodesia outside Barossa. The second law was to acknowledge the existence of native authority in Barossa. So the Barossa government was not created by colonialists, it was not created by the British. In 1936, they merely acknowledged it, whereas elsewhere they actually established native authority in 1936. But that was not the end of the arguments, because in before I'll jump to between 1939 and 41, a commission was established to look at the status of what was called Balubale district of Barossa, which includes Balubale land and Lunda land, and as you know, like the rest of Barossa land, there are no clean lines between ethnic groups. So that in 1941, as part of this ongoing conflict, the Balubale districts, Lunda and Balubale country, north of the present northern Barossa, were taken. They meant to do that. It's very interesting, because the agreement was that once they agreed that Balubale district, as it was, is outside Barossa, they gave an option for all Barossa people, including Lubales and Lunda, that if they were not happy to stay outside Barossa and remain there, they were free to cross back into Barossa territory. And they were given 6 months to do that. That if they did that, they were paid compensation for resettlement, even within Balubale district, because there you had different, once they were outside Barossa and they were different authorities. They were also told, if your village, according to this agreement, happens to be in Chief Indu's area and you are not happy, you are free to shift to the area of the chief that you want to be in, and they were also compensated. So that was basically the agreement. Then the Barossa government itself was compensated for the loss of hunting rights, the loss, all sorts of things that are as part of the deal. But to go back to Yeta's experience, another one of Yeta's great experience, by the way, when he went to Cape Town in 1921, he actually demanded, because he wasn't happy with the answers from the government, he demanded to be able to go to England and see the king. But then diplomatically, they refused that permission and told him that they have reports that there are some problems in Barossa. So he should come back first and sort those problems, then they will arrange for another convenient date for them. Now, in 1937, he was then invited to the coronation of King George VI, the father of the present queen. And he went there with his Ngambela, who was Munarula. Munarula had been the chief minister in Litunga earlier, having taken over from his own father, who had been chief minister in Litunga for a long time before him, before he was transferred to the main Kuta to become Ngambela in the early 30s. And he was in Ngambela in 1937 when they went to England. Then Ngambela, representing the Kuta, went with his secretary, Mr. Francis Lishoma Su. Then the Litunga went with his own secretary, who was my father, to England. So the four of them went to England in 1937, ostensibly to attend the coronation. But every opportunity where the Barroso government was meeting British authorities was taken to raise outstanding issues over the interpretation of the agreements and the treaties and their application, over the threat of eroding the internal powers of self-governance, over the administrators overplaying their hand, not accepting the clean border, that the rulers are Barroso people, they are the rulers of Barroso, that they can only be assisted in areas where they agree to be assisted. So even the visit to England in 1937, like the visit of Lewanika in 1902, was not just to attend to the coronation, but was also to raise these outstanding issues. Secondly, also like the Lewanika visit in 1902, it was used as an opportunity to see development and to capture ideas that can be brought to the development of Barroso. In the case of Lewanika, because by the time he arrived, the king who was to be crowned was sick. So the coronation date was postponed. This ended up making Lewanika stay in England for 6 months in 1902. Now, so it was not a stopgap overnight. And he had the opportunity to visit Scotland, all the major towns in Scotland, all the major towns in England, Manchester, Liverpool, all the major industries, the big farms, the big cattle industry, as well as educational institutions. In the case of Yeta, they even visited one who had been headmaster for Barroso National School, who had then retired. So they were interested in development, they were interested in education. I'm saying that to say what we are doing today is part of our tradition. To look for education, to look for development, and to look to ways we can learn about, through education, learn development ideas in order for development to be based on our own engagement in it. So that was 1987. I'd already mentioned to you the commission on the Balbala. In fact, on his way to England, Yeta passed through Livingston and held discussion with the governor of Northern Region and the Valley and Tunda traditional leadership in Livingston. And it is at that meeting that they agreed on the setting up of the commission, which was actually finally set up in 1939, despite the fact that the war had begun. This actually just led to the delay of the conclusion. But in 1941, the commission concluded its debate and agreed to the cutting off of Balubale. It was called Balubale district, even though within that district you had Lundas, you had Mbundas, you had Lugales, you had other ethnic groups and other language groups within that. And so in 1941, the decision was made. By 1948, the present northern border of Barroso were agreed. And it was also during Yeta's reign in Mwani that the present borders between Sheke and the Caprice were agreed. It was also during Lewanika's reign in 1905 that the border with Angola was agreed, although the losses were never happy with that because it split the country. All these borders actually split the country. So that But by 1939, when the commission started, the health of King Yeta III was failing, and it continued to deteriorate until in 1945, he resigned on health grounds and was replaced by his younger brother, who had also replaced him in Mwanangono Imasuku, who became Litunga in 1945. So that is basically, I wanted to give that as the background to the commemoration that we, as an introduction for discussion point, and Master of Ceremony. May I end there? Cha? Okay, he wants to say something. Let him say something. And then what is the next after this? No, I thought you'd give us the local Yeta. If he gives us a local, are the refreshments here? The refreshments are on their way. So when the refreshment comes, we can take a break. So let Induna from Greco talk, and then let's see how the local. Because we want to focus on Yeta the third. Yeah. Because some of this history we covered last time. I'm here or the other. Okay, after we take a break. Okay, you say something.
Yeah.
When you say the refreshment out there, are you talking about that? Can you call them again? Yeah, you can.
Okay. Thank you so much. The history has been rich, and it is very important. We used to get about this history from the books. But now we are getting direct from Dr. Aga. And also, we've been going through the literature. Yes, which is being presented and written in social media status. And it is very important that we understand this. But now, the bone of contention is that where is the civil family? We really want to participate in these programs as a I want to bring this to the attention of the leaders who are in charge of villages where farmers are based. What is the most practical development? Here it has been announced that one garden, one for us to achieve this, we need to understand how are we going to do it so that when we meet again, we are able to say we have been you are going to, when we conduct our presentations, you hear that very, 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 very nice and both people who are coming from Rwanda, who are coming from Tenanga. What are we going to do when we go back to our village to make sure that vegetables be bought? The seed makes it bought. Otherwise, if we don't do that, it will just end in paper.
Okay, let me answer that. You see, let's be very, very clear. Our history is not a negation of development. Our history is reaffirmation of the imperativeness of history, of development in our history. That's where we are saying that the legacy we have from Kingdom, the legacy we have from all his successors, puts importance on education and development. This is why even in this program, we are carrying on shared mutual education of our background, our history, and getting from that history the assurance that we have a mission to develop, to feed ourselves. And at the same time, we have the practical development. You've already introduced quite well, which I'm happy with. Then, in other words, we can't just forget history. Many people tell you that. Forget politics, just do any nigga who tells you to forget politics and concentrate on history. He wants to dominate you so that you don't control and command your development. You cannot command your development if you don't rule yourself, if you don't make the decision yourself, if you are not the one who decides to go and buy a seed, if you're not the one who decides to plant the seed, if you are not the one who decides and actually goes in the field to do it. Okay? But to do that, because part of the reason that history is important is because forgetting history leads to an inferiority complex. That development will come from other people. If we know our history, we know that development must come from ourselves or it is not developed. So that your concern is being completely met here. Because we don't want, we could have come here with a one-page statement. Buy seeds. Seed seeds are the best. Let's go outside and show you the farm. Then after you are gone, then the people remain discussing to themselves. They may have other issues. This is an opportunity that when you present yourself, there will be questions and answers, suggestions, and so on. Which means that when they make a decision to buy a seed, they are making an enlightened decision. They are not just obeying instruction. They are not just being a victim of propaganda. So that the garden, we are saying one household, one garden. That one garden must be owned, driven by that household. Not to say, but mama projects. If you are not careful, when someone is actually in his garden, if a visitor comes, Mukai, oh, we into my garden, yes, you don't want that. Mama?
Yes.
Yes. So your intervention should not be to make people not take ownership. Your intervention is to help them to take ownership. That once they've bought that seed, it is their seed. It's not a physical seed. Once they've seen the gardens, the demonstration gardens, they will look at them. So this is one I want to copy this. Once they've copied it, we don't want them to say, worker, that physical garden I took is bugger. Because he hasn't watered or whatever it is. Yeah. We want to take ownership, and we want our people to be owners of their own history. Their history empowers them. Mm-hmm. If Yeta could go to London, go and discuss with the governor, and he only went up to third or fourth grade or something, they should know from their history that they can take charge. And they will make better partners to Civico and any development agents, because they will know what they want out of that partnership. And what they get out of that partnership is something they will own. When I was an MP here, I went to address a meeting. After the meeting in Wakalangu Park, they took me down. Said, before you go back to Mungu, we want to show you what is this Norwegian? NORAD. We want to show you a NORAD town. Then we got there, and this is the brightest among them, and very good English. Honorable MP. This NORAD pump has buggered. That is not, it means that if those NORAD people thought they were taking development there, they've actually retarded those people from taking charge of development. And working together with us, we are going to guide you not to make the NORAD problem. That whatever you do, after behind your back, if a problem comes, they will say it's a civical garden. I hope Toma. Yeah. What refreshment was it? No. Yes. Okay. Charlie. Look at me. Okay, I'm on board. Okay, it seems there's demand for us to take a break.
Yeah.
But I wanted us to be able to leave enough time for discussion so that we can relax at the end. But we agree we'll take a break. We're gonna break. Kutiba Baros Band. Won't do now Baros Band.
Somoka kuliko mani kuyanda, oshe kuchikuya, abachupaganda, oshe kuchikuya, abachupaganda. Somoka kuliko mani kuyanda, oshe kuchikuya, Mane unapida ikona Yesu anakupiga kiliba munengo kapa bamatumbo batu yayo. Kakuli kuna msho wakashiri bauna urula tezi kuona ona alunyaro yayo tona kuo yukambola pa karu kakala sinachwana rushiko sindoko angorwa mwayo nikumuti kuo yeza kuli baba huru baba nifite rapi ya papata kone chwana hape ni baba muhape baba yeza kuli kiba nana kuna abako shuro banana kuna abako ndika kuleleko kono baba huru baziba.
But the old ones who understand those I don't know.
Simuluo yangu na wambola simuluo ya mshiko simuluo kwa mangola kwa ni sasa kuli bana bamba kamita haba kopana kuna ni mulero wasimuluo yaona na mungu kopana
what you are saying the way to say that first is that when the people, the family from the family to meet, they have got an agenda.
Yo namulero wamaziwana kona ukopanye ngabagasi amutu alimu yo wizi kwa lusaka yo wizi kwa landani kona kwa yo mkafurahi wako kanuna.
Usually supper puts people together. When you talk about the song this time, but when supper comes, they'll meet and after.
Ndio unaona sio sababu nakacheku mungaona Yeta kiri sio namulero waona wakacheku wakifuza kuja.
Also us the memorial for Yeta 3 is our supper for us.
Liwa ya moye tungo chana Yeta litia 3 litia litia Yeta 3. Chikutausa kuli lizazi la Luna.
This means the day of our own.
Yeta.
Yeta. Yeta.
Correct the
This is the day of the day.
Vale, vamara yaba opera fa kama kompyuta kwa mchoro unauka opera kwa mwisho waona hakuichusa kuna ni manzi yoni ndio na monka opera ni
What our police is the use computer system that we will use
ukate
Ingeti mwana mafa anashiku. Ineki jamu wananyambo. Diwa jandume. Mundi wasikata miutirufunga ngombe. Tukaleva andi tukaleva nyama. Osi chimasetu ni kuvaliondo lya mwana. Tumulumbe ulwi wetu Litunga letu. Tumulumbe ulwi wetu Litunga letu. Anyi matulana yali ao etutwaulu ya ungulu muno 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 etutwaulu ya ungulu muno etutwaulu ya ungulu muno 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 lyabalelo tunawalelwe okumimona lyabalelo tunawalelwe okumimona anyi etutwaulu ya ungulu muno etutwaulu ya ungulu muno 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 atumuwe
tulitunga oyu atumuwe tulitunga oyu
Ingeti mwana mafa anashiku.
atumuwe tulitunga oyu atumuwe tulitunga oyu oyu mtutalete munjira omo matungana jandi ao weulu wetu litunga letu ombumulwani eulu wetu litunga letu ombumulwani ani matungana jandi ao etumbumu wetu litunga oyu atumumu wetu litunga oyu mutu twaetete munjira omo omo
Ukamukupakulu mukale ape kakunembona kuli vakamera na vasiri. Kuna nizeko na kukumapunwa, kuna nizesa
mililoko nano sio matri kambe ngamini to kambe
mwako na kukala ape mono mukale. Esumuka cha nikale ntoyami na ikakala kwa makale.
wati kakala kama kale.
All right, fine. Mimi na wa camera, please capture things from the beginning so that presentation will be complete. Because it's in a language we have forgotten.
Ingeti mwana mafa anashiku. Ineki jamu wananyambo.
Oti pili ginzo kili
Diwa jandume. mundi wasikataniyo nilufunga ng'ombe.
tukaleba nyama ikimasetu
ni kuvaliondo lya ng'ombe.
Tumulumbe ni ulwi wetu omulwandi, tumulumbe ulwi wetu omulwandi. Anyi Litunga nandi andi ao etumbumu wetu Litunga uyu oyu Litunga nandi andi ao etumbumu wetu Litunga oyu oyu ulwi wetu Litunga letu ulwi wetu. Ulwi wetu kumulwandi atumu wetu Litunga oyu Matunga nandi andi ao etumbumu wetu Litunga oyu etumbumu wetu Litunga oyu mututwale tate mundila omo mututwale tate mundila omo omo. Mushobono luo pela pa kimushobono na wakale kushikana kwa kuza kumaru na mbulama mane kupita ni male na kuko katika ukera
including all the Jews.
Kona mushobo mono gambo la kawa
That was the language.
nikulumbe ka silo saluna nikulumbe ka paka kusibabaga
Honoring our language,
kusinga kama ndo amale
taking it with 2 hands.
baba munne basashe kishizilo kama samama.
Others who will not make the traditional shape, will make sure that they hold it with 2 hands.
Kama kaleo luna baka cheku bakesa kujulisile silo saluna nina bizwa luna sabi.
This time, most of us will have forgotten our culture and even our names.
Mimi ziyaru na rosa iziva mane mkulera kuli limulunga
We don't even know our village.
kono ke limulunga chale kulituli mulunga wakesa kuli lulatezo lulimulunga.
That name is not Limurunga, but Limurona.
Onani jana wasano na mo
Our village is in the plain.
yeneno
Yemeno.
bali kiliyeno
It's not Yemeno.
kiliyeno
Yemeno.
paswa be mutu kulifanya paswa be lafa
Where
My last stand.
my right stand.
sifuruti kacheku bali sifuruti
The Furuti.
kona sifuruti ki ifuruti kutiwa bashire abakutani
Ifuruti. Those who are dead do not come back.
chale kambe rukuta kwa simulo yanuna
If you go back where we come from,
neruka kuti sesilo sana kiku kusiputeka kiku kutapala kwa
to bring back our cultures. Go back to our family.
mani mwisho wao na wao kambe ona mwisho wao na wao kambe waona walibuka buli mutu ni mutu kofela yalo ambola wao utwa
Everybody can understand.
neruka ziba ni mabizo akashenga rona ngaba kufarona waziba kulikina mkete wako na kuliko
Not in our name. And
Kono-
name of our parents.
kono-
Not even explain.
bakesasi kolo uyumba
We are lost because of the Corona.
makolo watu wa uyumba
The Corona, what
Mane batuka cha kubabula kuti ndali mulozi chota.
People say me I'm a pure.
Amukamuka kuti chwale mulozi chota mushoma.
You are a Rosie, which tribe?
Kona kuti onata wona yofana tisakuli batu basike bakopana.
That is the issue to bring for the control.
Mulimi ni mulimi kaufera mwa mulozi kaufera kukopana malimi apanga mushomo wasiro.
There are many languages which have come in to make this language called Rosie.
Formula one kuna ni yalu.
Long ago there was Alui and Ramon.
Alui kibaba hizi mwali barona mwa bukeza mwangu.
Alui, they are those in the plain.
Tuona sifukamba na sisi ndio na mo. Sifukamba. Okay. Surrounding community. Okay. And kona kuli aluyana kibatu malo bihape babu ngula imalo dikati. Baba ya ile kwa mtu ya mishitu.
Those who are on the plateau.
Kono kisi kope ni baba ismwali wala baba iko mishitu kwa ufera kialu.
The mixture of those in the plains and on the plateau. They are all called Alui.
Shutano kidi mufera kwa lulimi wafana.
The difference is one, but the time is one.
Kuna ni mumbo watene.
They are Moe.
Kuna ni mkwandi.
They are Kwandi.
Kuna ni mkwangwa.
They are Kwangwan.
Mkwama koma mnyengo.
Koma mnyengo.
Mliua. Musubia. Mishobo kwa fena yeputezo na mama bro. Kona yepa ngasi no kulaka chini.
All these languages make what you call.
Kono mushobo kwa mula wa shimo wana usio. Bakeza sikitu alikena kisemu mushobo ni ambola kawa na chibo.
The language does not there. People make them process the one.
Kambe nitemuna.
If you can look back,
Leukazi wa mabivaruna.
we could know our name.
Leukazi wa nimizi yaruna.
We could know it in our
Leukazi wa nimizi yaruna.
We can even know our land.
Boli kona kutolokema.
How would they can get?
Leukazi badasu ufanya mele kusikifu. Zamane kibo kwa panelo na chwana.
We can even raise our cow.
Kona fana nilikula kuli. Ushikosi mundo kwa mango la kula ya mikumuni. Ili pulelo, ye kula ya kuli. Si Mungu wayevuona kopa na ye kopa nyanga mtu anu.
Where we come from, that's what brings the family together.
Twani tumeze alukopano na twala.
Thank you very much.
Hapo ni mboni kuna ni wala huko mate.
We have got elders.
Abu yanga kwa kuwela.
When we go for the convocation ceremony,
Mwana kwa yake ndugu yanga fulani bado na bayani. Asiku zamanga ndio na mambo tama kokora ya abantu ya kwa aliyo tutafanya wao wao
we usually go with young men where elders are not.
wanabuni bodelo wao batelo na twala kama kwa nabudi yana ngakao kera yalukana utaba na wao bado na kundi batibesi
The way I've seen the elders here, if that was the way we go together to their room, I think our different.
mutiasa division sahai
The person who does not know his culture,
hapasa slat
who does not like his culture,
peto ufana ile komienda ile yes namuna
he is like a cow which is lost, which has not from.
mwiso wale balodari bulasi wa Lo wambo tu yani ambola mwambola lo to
When I'm talking like that, we call it slow one.
slow we pray pray kama ni pray ko ni ya fasi sipo kile
That's talking here and there, but he's saying
aluka ngasi lo sauna kusikuteka kusinga ale ndio mwana nasi kuteka mashino
you
hauna
can take our culture, bring it and respect it.
mane sikalu isa
It will take us,
ni kuze zeba mbozi basi iko
it will take us even to these issues.
hapo ni mashino na balino mwauro
Because our forefathers were farmers in the Balosa.
bona hapo utakuti kuna ndio ndio wa yasinda ni kuna njimo wote kulikuja na kulima na kuja kunde kuna njimo ni kucha ni kumwa unaona mwa mwa
There was eating, drinking, and farming in the Balosa.
mwana kwa ya mulambo ama emborwa
During the land of Mulamba Mangono.
1795 mambunda
The Bundas, when they came from Angola.
bale male na bomwe chengere bomwe kandala ni mwene mudikisha batambo mwa dala kwa tumulamba naingolwa
when the many chiefs came and received by Mulam,
batisize ipeu
they came with some seeds which were not there in the Bible.
tuosolana kama tuwamabe ndibona mane
we helped them. We joined hands with them.
kona kuli silika sabona kaufela nerusi swala kama tuwamabe sabona paka ni usikoloni amoka ufela.
Whatever they came with an hour, we brought them together.
Nebatiro sitamoko dimware.
They arrived in the praise.
Kono chora bakesa kiba choba twaibu kuina mware kwa mishiko ule kujinwa lichozeni chazeni kile mwa kutakutoya.
Because there are people who used to grow crops.
Kona kuli bwana baipo karibu unalo matokeo kwa mishiko.
So they decided to go to the practice.
Mana upula mande baipo gani choseba mula masaba fakuita kwa mishiko.
So Mulamba gave them to come and settle in the practice.
Luna luinerusa zikupina mumshiko.
As the Louis will never know.
Kono kacheku ni bona kuli kacheku alwi. Nilama lo tika cheku mwili na kwa mshiko.
But today, I have seen that even the Louis, they are now there.
Bakesa kuli kimula uba change. Mula uba kena clotting katika ofela. Bakesa ni peu za kwa mshitu ni peu za mwale waliwa.
That change was brought by Mulamba.
Kiona
Seeds which were being planted in the place and on that.
kona pulo kapamale mu pulo obatise basidiko kutolumunyera kuli lukute mwasilo mole bapira bashekalo.
That is the idea the city of him was brought.
Mane kuitumira kubona kakuli kuna ni raisi kuna iliko tala mwanja kuna ni mauza mtu hapa ni kunga mauza kugea mwamezi hapo ni kunga mwanja kugea mwamezi ono kuna ni wewe fanya wa
no one can plant those in the place.
kuna ni wewe fanya mwamezi kuna ni wewe fanya kwa mshiki.
Varieties or crops which will be planted in the valley and we planted in the plain and planted on the valley.
Politiki sisi kaya kawaida.
Then the politics is not separated.
Mangi aiki seru kimi wa hai mwisho wa hai.
Let each use his stand and his land.
Mulimi la mtu ni mtu kwa ofela. Munaupe mulimu hadi bulaka kukisalona la msanera.
The time of everybody, if the owner uses properly, it owns it.
Kapuli da kuisupa na mwana kuli. Ndani mulozi. Mawe chancha. Jabu wakukuza kuli. Wena mulozi uzera kakai. Hata kwenda maili.
When you just say me and my Lord, you point your finger and say me and my Lord. You ask where the Lord from where?
Lugule fera kuli. Kau fera aluna. Nubana Litunga. Nubana wautu ajimu mkoko pani mshemo wa Litunga.
We are all from one family. From the Litunga. We are all one.
Ankambo na mwamusho wana wasiwela kukutakate.
When you talk to the Guyana,
Litunga babu kula kuli mbumuka wakati ndo namuli.
before
Kuti mulena anata ingole ni mutu.
the chief have got no grudge with any person.
Kona kuli mange ni mutu ka ufela. Ile mshoma kama rudini ile mfika ufela.
Every person.
Ka ufela ula ka ufela lubala Litunga.
We are all sons and daughters of Litunga.
Kona kuli aiba njulu lukoba nuna twalo kuba asimo moto kisimo.
When we become one,
Misiro saro na mukasi zamaya msema na ba mtendo na baba ukani wa ina
our culture will be protected.
kaule
Even
kuhusu
our
na
children
problem
will grow up
ni kwale kwa mtu wangu hapa kutika pale
even our king
kwa kutika
will be
pale
respect our parents and our wisdom starts from your house.
kuta kumunga
Coming to the headman,
kuta kunduna wasala
coming to the induna of the area,
kuta kunduna silalo
coming to the induna of the Selalo.
kona kuta chwale fa security
Now coming to the district,
fashi ya munga alo na Litunga ngotana walo
where our Litunga is.
chagula wewe.
This is a time of participant participation, discussion, and contribution. So that each one who is the right of each other. We learn from who? Other people. This is our time now. The questions and discussions, if they come after the presentation.
It can be that. Even after the presentation, time we will need it. But if we put them all together and speak, then you may not ask certain questions better. So if we can now focus on what has been discussed so far, including the little bit of introduction that was discussed, then after that, we have now the presentation. Then after that, we again will be free to participate. But it's just a suggestion. If people feel we should listen to the presentation and have comments afterwards, because I think the presentation is so loaded and so specific to agriculture that you may have questions and opinions on what we have covered so far. It might get lost. Yeah. And we move on that.
My suggestion is what you have discussed so far on the traditional issue, that should be our to start and finish so that we go to questions, so that we don't miss up questions for and I will sit down for the presentation on the but when about then the Rambo, that's it. So very easy more than the Rambo. When I said that,
Tunaongea kumwenda mani. Tunakuza tunaongea kumwenda mani.
First and foremost, I start fella. Kakuli amu ya kwa mlene. Kusona nje Latin mwafuta ya basi zangu. Auko nikubula ya Latin ifeli. Kakula uka ya mwafuta uka kumbuka. Wali kuinzi nole. Etume utu. Yo kilaki. Kona kuini suru ya nasikwa. Kwa le message ya yolu kilepa. Kambe mushobo usike kusiela kulikuwa maloko. It should not remain just a language for proverbs, occasional showing off that you remember it. It is actually a complete language, and it should be promoted. The second message is that each and every language is important and it's worthy. As Africans, we should be on a mission to make sure that none of our languages die. As many of our languages can be revived, restored into day-to-day life, into science, into books, the more we can do that, the better. So, but to answer your question more specifically, more specifically, when the Sutu-speaking group came, to start with, although we call them Sutu-speaking, Sevituan himself Kimufuke. So he's a particular type of Sutu. And within his groups, there were others who were not Bafuke, but they were Sutu-speaking. Then from the borders of Orange Free State and the Sutu now, before they reached Baraslan, it's a very long distance, and they did not have, it was not a one-jump journey. They took a lot of time. They settled in different places for many lengths of time. They fought many battles, and they were also collecting the people they found on the way. The other major place that they collected people was from what is now Botswana. So that although Savitwana spoke Sesotho more close to the present so-called Southern Sesotho, within his groups, there were people who spoke other variations of Sesotho, including Setswana. So they were not all Bafokeng, they were not all Basotho, some were Tswana, and some were other groups altogether. Furthermore, even before this Savitwan occupation came, Barosland was from the very beginning a multicultural, multi-language, multi-community society. Yes, the children of Mbuyamwambwa and so on, originally, they were a breakaway from a Lunda group. But when they came into what is now Barosland, it was not very heavily populated, but there were other people there. Makwengo, some of you call them Bushmen, which is a terrible insult. So some of us here have the blood of everybody we found here together with those who came. Then after those came, other migrants have been coming. You could even say that there is no Barosi who has no migrant blood. Indeed, as Bantus, we know that we are all migrants. So that even from the very beginning, when the Luyana-speaking people came here, yes, their language dominated because they were the rulers, but the other languages were also mixed with them. Then as they spread from that original point of settlement, and so on, a variation of the language came, although as you have heard today, many of these languages are still basically very close to the original Rihanna, and they can be reconstituted into one language. But in addition to that, there were also other language groups that came in. Luvales, Lundas, Mbundas. There were also other language groups that came in at different routes, Sisulia, Mafwe, and so on, which now, so that even before the Sutus, although you could say that the dominant government language was Suriana, the other languages also existed. So when the Sutus came, one of the explanations that why was this Sutu language able to capture was that in any case, they found us speaking many different languages. And they merely made Sisutu the lingua franca, which could be a language like Kiswahili, which belongs to nobody, but somehow everybody can learn to understand it and begin to dominate. So your specific question is answered in a little book written by Mbikuta called Mwananyanda, the son of Luwanika. At the end of that book, Mwananyanda, the son of Luwanika, whose history is very interesting because when his father was overthrown in 1884, he was taken away into what is now Angola. And so it's a very long story. I think we'll have a month when we discuss it. So he writes there that he apologizes that I'm writing in Silozi because not many of us remember Suriana. Only and him, who was born maybe in 1870 something. He's saying only our fathers know it, the pure language. So I'm apologizing, I'm writing in Sisutu. Then he goes further. This Sisutu we are talking about is no longer even the Sisutu of Sevituan. It is actually the Sisutu mixed with the other languages to create Silozi. He even concludes that in the end, this language Silozi as a lingua franca, which is 75% Sutu. He says it can even be called Luanika's language because before the reign of Luanika, after the reign of Luanika, that's when it began to be dominant. Partly because the missionaries I've told you before, the Sutus and the French that came, had come from the Sud. So they reinforced the language which had for 30 years been the government languages to make it a lingua franca. So the first schools up to 1913 were actually using Sisutu, Southern Sutu, pure Southern Sutu for lessons. So these Yetas, when they went to school, they were learning in Sutu. Luanika himself was a Sutu speaker. But in 1913, the missionaries and some of the African followers, as they were trying to spread the word, the further away they got from the center, the more they bumped into a variety of Sisutu, which was more and more different. So they concluded that it had in fact become a new language. So that after 1913, they started to promote this language, Silozi, which is 75% Sutu, 25% every other languages in Barosland. In fact, I have a book here called Silozi English Dictionary, Yadal, which also was my father is acknowledged to have contributed more words in this than anybody else in the 1930s. This is the latest version. There were versions in the 1930s. There was version in 1913. So that over time, by the 1930s, that is when the Silozi, which is markedly different from Sutu, became the standard language of the Bible and the standard language of teaching. In many ways, the Christian gospel and the writing of the Bible is the one that now reinforced Silozi as we speak it now into a standard language, which now became more dominant because our rulers, starting from Luanika, were also Sutu speakers. When Luanika went to England, his interpreter came from Kamazi village. He was the Swana speaking, but he could translate. The missionaries spoke it. Then Luanika's children and our grandparents of their generation went to Mr. Jala's school, where they were learning this story. So gradually, even the people in the government of Barosela became more familiar with Silozi than Siliana. But I'm saying it is not dead because even in the royal court, even in the villages, Siliana is still spoken. I remember when we were campaigning for Nalikwanda Park, when we reached deep into Nalikwanda, Womfahamu Mbuna, who spoke Siliana and Swango, suddenly switched into Siliana. And the people are cheering and answering back. And we look at ourselves on the stage like it's only a few of us who are losses here. These people have another language. So the further you go from the line of the river, whether east or west, you find that the language Suriana is not as dead as it seems when you are in Mungu. And this engineer, and sirinji womunamuru womuruti wokamayo muntu mwakona kuyalapa
kutangama vile shetu kinyera akafai sizomo biumbe.
Looking at what the way we are describing the county,
Kutabela program yengayeza.
we are very happy with this program.
Sihulu kuba na mahabuluna kabaluna mali amakanda.
To us, to our children, or us who are on the ground.
Kapuli baba muka baba kateni wabole watu ngaba hizi mwali kuna kwanza. Watu wale kuna kwanza.
They say those who are in the platoon one shift,
Na mama zile bakimtakupa pana ni mara na wewe bali ni mara kwa yeo.
they ran away from this place to go there because the cheaper the people who were there.
Bona mangi anakumane kuyizi mwasakateka kamakanda.
That's why man they found in this area of Coronation.
Never did la mangi ya kumute sakala kumbe ya kuni. Na alwani sanga mama gombo ni
Even the name man just a nickname because he used to like his uncle.
na kula gani la kumena kuni. Mumame kukumu.
You have to say this the other way.
Na hata kuna mtu bado pale na nuna yole.
You should also give us the system so that we can also get the throne.
Kwa nini mtu
His name is Matakwana.
Mutiare ana ile pale kuizo kodoa kutaba kumlena yana mmatimo yenangalama.
He went there because he was afraid of Ngarama.
Sasa aizo kutela pali joya.
Then he went to the prayer.
Pali vichifika halika chini.
Where did Kahari is?
Sasa atutamani kana kwa hiyo ngalama nasaliyo kumanela kwa.
By then Ngarama was no more. The people him was before.
Kale bahago yena bana hindi ni wala kama mkulela kuli. Ingala uta chakuri bali bali yakujende rumajile hata hiyo.
It's very difficult now. Why can't you go back to the friend? Because the person who were running away from the normal.
Nilikuona hata kisasi ndo yana hapo.
He was too busy Yana.
Alikakalwa kale. Ilikuta utakuli. Nenda lupale vikiona.
We have failed, it's okay.
Kwa hiyo kama kwanza, hakuna watu wale kialu hii.
Those people are not forward, they are we.
Jina yake wao jela mama kabaya.
He's the one who created or started.
Chakupenda mama.
Or he entered into the water in a place called Matapaya.
No, nilikuta hapo kila mwezi mwanangu ni basi biko nyuma na baba sio tena mama.
We are very happy that living in the physical human actually bring.
Nilikileku akanyata nyatumuza do mwali lalo zeme ndio na pale.
I've tried to spread this message in the areas where we come from.
Nilimo na watu mwatibele kama wao kunyata wala kitu wao. Ni wao walikuwa la kitu kama na noti ile ndio na.
Even they are saying physical also visit there.
Kakuli wanapokuwa program ya physical wanapokuwa wa Mungu yani ni mwale ndio kakuli.
Physical is where the life of people is. So even when they are like to the family.
Wale leo mkaa kunyani bado ya kunyani pale hakuna yakapeleka hapo ndio bana sema hivi.
If you go with a bundle of fishing nets, no one will buy it. No one.
Kuna mtu hizi za kitevu zile amakulima. Bakari rume anapeleka.
But if you take it there, you buy it now.
Kale, bali ile basi tiko, kulibatoa ni mwatiki salwanga. Kama ni maji lao ni mwalwanga. Amu wao watakulima. Sihuru amwe wabolita batali bakulika kimeleka kazi munya nafa. Sasa kama napa kiti na kamuni wako ya mwana mule. Watu wa mkabo nakuli. Bakamu rudi na mali mwetu wao makani na mwaka kumilate la hayo ukali ya.
People will be running for you and if others will follow you delay.
Kama leo mliamwe ndio unawapa hivi wati hawa.
We have received that message as people want.
Mali kama kuna tudo na ile ya kabisa ya fedha. Like how I do when I find. Baba bili bele
If
if
it
you
is
have someone else.
possible, let's finish with this coming week, what we saw that
Baba bili bele if you have someone else you. Kilalo sakangu ya. Kilalo someone else. Tanya black. Sorry. Luitu bele ya hulu kapro kia boye. Bakuru kia vena usindiri waneka. Timu kakuikuta. Kuna ina gari lo mupra kuno na leo.
We thank you very much.
Waneka. Mutu sindiri kadere kulu mukwela.
The one collect four things where we are remembering.
Kutotuwe kwa wike tueli. Kama waneo.
5
Kutolamlela pakulwani swakisho kwendili.
Keeping us away from being fought by other tribes.
Mani kutolutakulwala nikumwela kakuyonga wawase mbali kubakika mo.
Teaching us how to write and read by bringing the word.
Kabune ulutie kulikuta kona mululi leo binakasidi.
He left us the knowledge to keep ourselves.
Jalkan program ye kami lagama ya ni kita kwa kuweka program ini mshie dualo na mwana mlenga akataka.
Program of the day our prince.
You are about to commit treason now.
I also want to say
Stammering over straightforward. You that's it.
You can answer that. Much appreciation and honor to the Honorable House, Dr. Aka, colleagues. Thank you very much that you have accepted us to become and operate in your area. Being the head, and I would say I request you that in your area want to be our ambassador. And development that will bring Uchane to you. And if each one of you who are the heads in Unas would come out like he has done, that would be my pleasure. I'm promising you that before you leave here, I'll give you the date that will come to your place. Maybe before I have a question. The question goes to the doctor. May you help me and clarify to me? I believe that there was a time that there was an agreement between the British South African company and our team here, the one. And that agreement was made in fear of the Machiavelli. But in his narration, I heard that this agreement was not well defined. On top of that, I want to learn what transpired in should be 24. Because I believe the Barossa land was protected by the British. And then what exactly transpired in 24 that the Barossa land was not fully understand what was prevailing in our nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me clarify that, maybe retrace my statement. That when Litunga was overthrown in 1884, he returned in 1885. By coincidence, the major meeting in Berlin, which is historically referred to as Scramble for Africa meeting, also took place between 1883 and 85. So by the time he returned to the throne, the Europeans, including the Americans, by the way, they were represented, everybody was represented except Africa. They had resolved to share out Africa to themselves, regardless of Africa. Therefore, whatever internal problems that you had faced were not the only problems that they existed. Now we had internal and external problems. The external problem, the major overriding external problem, is related to the resolutions of Europeans to come into Africa and start occupying it. Starting with the Dutch and the British in the Cape. When they landed in the Cape, they started a series of wars. Wars of African resistance against European occupation. Starting with the Cape, the Tambos, the Pondos, and other Xhosa people, including the Khoikhoi people, were resisting the occupation of Africa. The first Europeans to set camp in Cape Town were Vasco da Gama, sent by the Portuguese. After some time, the Portuguese power was rescinding. Then the Dutch made a settlement of Cape. Then the British took over from the Dutch. Meanwhile, the majority of white people in Cape Town then were Afrikaners. French Huguenots, Dutch people, they were also a mixture. But they are the ones now we call Afrikaners. So those who resisted British domination undertook what is historically referred to as the Great Trek, which is an Afrikaner way. From Cape going inland. As they came further north inland, they were disturbing Africans and they were meeting resistance by Africans. They were conquering Africans. They were occupying African territories. They were causing disturbances and wars among Africans. Then some of those Africans are the Sevituans, who trekked also running away from that Nipake, coming north slowly, first in what is now northwest South Africa into Botswana until they crossed at Kazungula, went into the southern province, part of present-day southern province, Livingstone, Kazungula, and Kalomo, and came even into parts of Ilaland before turning around and now coming into Barosana. This is in the mid-1830s. At the same time, another group of Zwangenda was also going work, and it came and settled in Kalanga land and set up Makebele land, right on the banks of the Zambezi. What we Barosis considered right on the borders of Barossa. Another group which is now referred to as Nguni. In 1835, they crossed the Zambezi somewhere where it meets the Rwanda, famously when there was an eclipse, and went through the eastern part of what is now Zambia, went all the way up to Tanzania. Some remained there, some settled in what is now Malawi, some settled in what is now eastern Zambia, some settled in what is now northern Mozambique. For Barosiland, there was yet another Nguni group led by King Gabe, even before Mzilika, who also entered Barosiland, but he was defeated. But the threat posed by Muzilikas, and particularly some who took over from Lupemula, was very much present by the time of Luanika's reign. So the threat from Matebele was real, because they were crossing the Zambezi into the area is too close to its kingdom. It's an intrusion into his area of influence. So they became part of the external threat. I'd summarize it that all this arises from the resolution of Europeans, not only in 1884 and 85, but even earlier, 500 years ago, when they started roving around Africa, creeping into Africa, starting with Morocco, starting with West Africa, going to Congo, destroying the Congo kingdom, destroying some of the Angolan kingdoms, and posing a threat, so that even before 1884, you were given a date, 1775, when some people coming away from the harbor being called by the Portuguese in what is now Angola, came into Barosiland. And there has been even the Louis. It cannot be ruled out that their movement southwards into Barosiland was part of a response to the push by Europeans from the Atlantic side through the Congo. You may know that when the Portuguese went to Congo, they first made contact with the Bakongo kingdom, and they found a high civilization of Africa. They even established diplomatic relations between the Bakongo king and the Portuguese king, and between the Bakongo king and the Pope. In fact, one of the children of the Bakongo king became a bishop in the Roman Catholic Church. The kingdom became a Catholic kingdom. But as the Europeans became greedy, they did not just want to deal in friendship. They did not just want to deal in trade. They wanted to occupy. So that even the Luyanas coming into Barossa may be a reaction from the Lunda kingdom, the Luba kingdom, and all these other Bakongo-based kingdoms, which were being disturbed from the Atlantic. So if you look at the position of Barossa on the map of Africa, particularly in Southern Africa, it is actually the center of Southern Africa. So if you are running from Bua, you are heading to Barossa. If you are running from the Portuguese, you are heading for Barossa. If you are running away from the Belgium, you are heading for Barossa. So that Barosland became the island of peace, tranquility, the furthest point away from European aggressors. If you go beyond Barosland, you're going to see other Portuguese Barosas in Mozambique. So it was very central. And that is point number one. Point number two is that if you study the Barossa plain, the Barossa land, and compare it to the rich Upper Nile Valley, it is a replica. And when we study the culture of Barossa, original Barossa founders, it is amazing how they made canals like the Africans, because you think these mixed race people who are now called Egyptians are the original. No, the original Egyptians were black, they were us. So those who built the pyramids, those who built those canals, those who adopted canals the way the Barossi adopted them, were black people arising from the Niles, the Sudan, Khartoum, and the Congo. Even some people say we come from the Congo, but the Congo was also a transitional point, which also included Angola. Even the Louis, by the time they came to Barossaland, they did not just come from what is now Congo. They also passed through what is now Angola to come here. So that the external aggression had been long in coming and started a long time ago. And the movement of migration towards Barossaland, which in our history becomes like the preferred life. If you were running away from being disturbed from the fertile Nile Valley, you pass through these jungles and forests in Central Africa. Suddenly you come to this grand plain. It looks like paradise recovered, like you have gone back to Egypt. So that is the foundation of Barossa. Now coming back towards the Lewanika's time, is that this external European invasion had already been disturbing Barossa from the north and the west. By the reign of Africa, it was now disturbing us from the south. Even when it was in the form of direct confrontation with other Africans. If you go beyond that, you would know that these same African you are confronting are only at the Zambezi because they've been confronted by white people in Cape Town, in Durban, and in Transvaal. So that the British, the agreement with Lewanika, the other point I made, which I'll repeat, is that after I came back to the throne, the Barroso government was very committed to find an ingenious way of protecting Barroso, regardless of changing circumstances, regardless of internal difficulties. And the strategy they adopted is to befriend one of these European aggressors, preferably the strongest one. And they chose the British. There are other reasons they chose the British, because Africans understood that in the fight against African slavery, somehow, although the British were at the forefront of slavery, they were also at the forefront of fighting slavery. And the missionaries who came here were part of the anti-slavery movement. So there was a preference for the British. Then there is the factor of Collier. Although he was French, he was Protestant. He was a Huguenot Protestant who had run away from France to settle in Holland and in Geneva because the French government had become a Catholic government and it was persecuting Protestants. So Collier had no love for France, despite being a Frenchman. He had no love for France because he thought France was a Catholic country. So he was at the forefront of recommending that the British are better because they were Protestants. In addition to that, he married a Scottish woman. In addition to that, his first station before coming to Barossa like Livingstone, was in Bechuanaland, which was a Methodist point by mission, Moffat. So that these are the reasons that. So the agreement with the British, the intentions of Barosland is to have a government-to-government agreement. In terms of the African definition of friendship, that if I'm your friend, if somebody attacks you, I'll defend you. Somebody attacks me, you defend me. That was our attitude. And we were prepared to pay some price to get that arrangement. If they wanted a license for prospecting for minerals without giving them land, we can grant them that. And in order to ensure that the protection is effective, I've mentioned that Yeta and Mukamba, who later became Mukamba, had earlier been sent to Chief King Khama's capital to go and study how they are living with missionaries, how they are working with the British. And so there was also a recommendation from Khama. There was a recommendation from Yeta and his friend Mukamba that what we have seen there seems to be effectively answering our needs to be protected and also to retain some level of self-governance. But the agreements that was signed in 1889, 1890, 1990s, and 1900 were all revised, were subjected to various revisions up to 1909. But even then, it was based on the assurance, which also Luanka got when he got to England, that although you are dealing with the company, this company is the agent of the government of Britain. The Barosses were never satisfied. So they continued to fight for a direct agreement and a direct relationship with the British Colonial Office, which is one of the missions of Yeta going to Cape Town in 1921. And the success of that part of the mission was the establishment of that government in 1924, where the arrangement for Barosland and the British then changed to a direct one with the Colonial Office. It was never one single agreement. And as I've said, even in 1924, what was agreed was subject to further discussions, particularly relating to the details of interpretation, because you are interpreting from Slozi to English. Malozi bali mlena umuhulu, the English want to say paramount chief. You understand? Huh? But also that Malozi say Lubata Babusis. The English think that you are asking for the colonizer. So there were arguments throughout, up to Independence Day, particularly up to 1958, when even the British considered that the king of Barosland is not a paramount chief. We accept your name for him, is the Litunga. And to make it clear to you that the agreement we have with you will be respected. Instead, we are now officially going to say that the name of your country within the colonial system is Barosland Protectorate. Yes. A thing which annoys Kaunda's left, right, and center is like fighting against water that fell out last year. That it is a fact that Barosland negotiated its own arrangement with the British before Zambia was born, before Northern Rhodesia was born. In fact, Northern Rhodesia benefited from the negotiation of Barosland. Northern Rhodesia benefited from the stand taken by Barosland, which led to a protectorate rather than a European settler colony like Rhodesia, like South Africa. That is the contribution of King and government. to the advancement of political development in Zambia, which is very, very, very crucial. I don't know what else you have. 2012. So that, as I said, the discussion with the British was continuous, trying to refine the agreement in terms of the definition and the implementation, in terms of how much room for self-rule there is. This discussion went on. In 1958, 53, there was a Barroso Act, which now specifically recognized that this is Barroso Protectorate and it has a direct relationship with British colonial office. And that whether it's for the administrative convenience, being governed by the same governor who's governing Northern Rhodesia, Barroso is a protectorate in and of itself. In the same way that I said earlier that Barroso land, Bechuanaland, Lesotho, Basutoland, Swaziland were separate protectorates, but under one high commission, who was like a governor. At first, it was the High Commission based in Cape Town. Later on, it became the High Commission based in Mafeking, which was in South Africa, but covering Basutoland, Bechuanaland, and Swaziland. So that even with Northern Rhodesia, even with Northwestern Rhodesia, it was for the British convenience of administration that they used one person to be overall of two protectorates. In the same way that the governor of the Gold Coast, which is now Ghana, was covering both the Gold Coast and the British Togoland. At the time of independence, there was a referendum where the British Togolese voted to go into independence together with the Ivory Coast to create Ghana. In the case of Barroso land, they negotiated a Barroso land agreement, which for the first time agreed that we'll go into independence as one country, one nation. That phrase is in the Barroso land agreement, which was written in first in April, then finally in May 1964. It is out of the one country, one nation that you have one Zambia, one nation. In May, you couldn't say one Zambia, one nation because Zambia did not exist. So the idea was that there will be a country which we are in it together as one nation. That is the essence of the Barroso agreement. Then in we should say that the minute before Zambia could get its independent act, this issue of which way Barroso had to be settled. And it was settled in May, on May the 18th, 1964, finally. And then after that, that is when the negotiation for the independence of Zambia. Otherwise, you wouldn't know whether the Zambia are giving independence include or exclude Barroso. So in July, a couple of months after Barroso agreement, that's when the British passed a Zambia Independence Act bill, to which is the first constitution of Zambia is contained in that British parliamentary bill, which was written in on the understanding that there is now a full agreement of how Barroso will go forward as part of this Zambia. But in 1969, the Zambians unilaterally, using force and threats of imprisonment and actual imprisonment, abrogated the Barroso agreement. Since 69, the Barroso have been pleading that please, this is the document that makes us part of each other, one country, one nation. The Zambians have been ignoring it. Then we assisted to save Zambia from the one-party state of Kaunda. Then the Baroses again gave the Zambian a chance to say, now that we've gotten rid of UNIT, which got rid of the basis of our unity, we'll give Zambia a chance to go together in the nation. So when MMD was formed, the Baroses, like other Zambians, voted for a change. After Mr. Chiluba took over, before we understood, by 1994, there were rumors that he wants to arrest Litunga. So the Baroses have to now think again that these friends of ours, how many chances are we going to give them to work together? Okay? But even after that, the plea was that, can you honor the arrangement that made us part of the same country? And there's never been a post. So the Baroses were alienated for several years. Then Mr. Sata, to win an election, comes and lies to the Baroses that me, I'll give you back your Baroses document. And many Baroses gave PF votes, which they would not have gotten without that state. After he has gotten to State House, he reverts to the Kaunda formula of promising one thing and betraying it after you are in power. This is the background. Yeah. Yes, very much, and it's a very proud project. So the 2012 is a reaction to this repeated betrayal, the failure to resolve the basis of our unity. Then you will recall that young people were at the forefront of finding out that we wonder why we are suffering. We did not know that we even had a country of our own because they had not been taught their history. So when they tried to meet to pursue that political end, some were killed, some were injured, many were arrested. So that is where the state stands. I hope I've answered clear. No. Okay, we can take two more interventions.
I have actually three questions. Development issue. You stated by the mastermind that they have very, very high rate. The high rate suggests invasion, suggests changing the content of the city. So my three questions are: does CECO have any genetically modified? Two, is your maize seed reproductive? What I mean by that, you need to produce only designed for one use. You then force it to grow, come back to it, which lock the weed. I'm asking you that development question. Thank you.
So can you reserve that question to answer to make your presentation?
Okay.
Because it's a very good question, and it may lead to further discussion. And it's an important question because real development is self-dependent. Sure? Which means that real development must lead to independence, not to dependence. So I know it's a big challenge to you. So I think integrate it in your presentation at Alpha. Is there another?
Nango, Nambo, the Kanakam, Nambo, all way up of Lama. Look, Mana Contra, Unamo, look, Maya, never quality. Manapuri, Wamba, Yango, Nango, Mania, Mahal, Mania, and your right one. Nicola Burato Ripuri, Pokaoma, from Mana, Motata Ochoa. And said, Puri, a chocolate, Lunama was not Wamba Sakura, Okaoma. Si ngoja atakuwa kuelewa kwamba kwa Mungu ni kwa sababu kwa kuelewa kwa kwenda lugha bwana mshimo kwa bwana bata kulikapa kwa bwana anachunga lupile nyingi mlupile kwa kama mshimo leo na ukuta kwa mwana wangu wa kule bapile mshimba ukitapuli kachekole tu hali yako kuhanela kuitwani samaha aluna onata beli bwela pa mshimba utabeza kuni leo kisha utata mahala aluna kwa kumania kumani neba kumaruba takuya kwa ndio wao unakwani ukola kunena kuitele kwa kulibani bwela ni aluna kwa kale mshimba unakale sasa kitu yofumana kwa kachekule kwa mwana kuisiweza kuli kachekule wao kwa watu wa maana kwa ule kwenye ngoko watu wanaona wa kutapa ni mali ile kazipata imani kumbuka sasa ndio mwana Kiswahili kwa na kibanda tunaona mbona hapa zetu wabole kitu bake tu kulikuwa wakati kutapa ana mali ya kosa kwa watu wa ikaza hizo akao vile kwa mali ya kugawa mali faida tu mjuna wewe ndio wake tu kama kwa bana mwana ya chemo ni extra achakule yako penzemshi ukao yule bwana kachokiliwa kwa nini kama kwa na shamba ukuteni mimi wa pera shamba na kaya na mbuda nipo na watu watu bala kwa kalo watu wengi na Kongo na nyingi nipo na lugha taifa hiyo uko na kuko hata hapa ya pili ya upele kwa kama vile yao ndio lao nipo na maneno bodi pale ni kukiti chukuli kachekule ndio salao ayo hata kama na baada zoro mali ya profesa lao nikute na matasi watu wale lao ababali banana maisha yafika kama tabu Ethiopia ya kumbe bakene Kongo nikuta matasi zero kika zero ndio ya kikale ndio ya bale badala wa pasahani wafiti wana mali kule wa kuja kwa badala wa pasahani kwa kuma ni kwa tupeni kwa kwini kuna badala bale kwa kule kwa Kongo kwa chekole sikumani hapo kuna ni ketu ya kuli baba amu baitu ile wa haya ungeona tubani mbaya kwa Kristo usikapasa wewe ndio mfanya baitu sema sheria abantu babona swali kuli ba kense babona swali kwa Kongo bale basikapasa andi ba hatele kwa maana kuli katika nule education izama ngie kutoka mwana hapo ndio bashaka katika ndio jambo la kademu letu mali hapo ndio kutoka mauro tena sio kwa ndio kama ndio nataka mimi yeye kama chumba kwa
okay, last is it last and
Mjumbe zangu anaye pana ngira basi kwa kawaida ni pamoja ngira na pamoja ya kuna hapo ni wanyama kwa pamoja au ya kusimama kwa kama mara chao kama gani ayo tena kwa jambo kwa ngoma hiyo ndio leo kajiaji ni baba mtuta kwa mengi wale walio kati wale hii ndio ndio na yeye ndio mbaya kana kuna mambo hata kwa yote tena mambo haya watu kuna kuna katika kwa ini itu tahu karena penjara itu dalam proses ini kalau tahu dia dia tapi apa yang kau mau kasih apa cara kamu kau mau mana apa yang baik ini saya mau pasangnya kalau kau ada orang situ sama lena kalau kau pikir mau untuk sih waktu yang mau kuimuogopa waka kwa Mungu mkarimu miaka miwili kati au kupale hakuwa ni za Serena kuliza kwa kansu kwa kusema nini nitamia kati nitamia na watu kwa watu kuna na watoto kwa kinga watu kwa watu kwa kutegemea kwa kwa leo unataka na kwa utakumwa watu wangu kama na wasema wangu kama hivi kwa pata Una ndipo kama kama na kama na kufurahia leo kuzo watakula kanti hakuna wako kuna katika kwa nini ikiwa sana
nalibona kulizombuleze akipuzo ki statement mina nalumeani statement yo konobulozi kimusebezi waluna kaufelawo deoza kuli muzibelele malozi abamukulu bamilwanele mina musebezi wakumina kubalumba kwewo balwanelani kapa basikalulwanela hani mani ni mani waluna wikela kunga kubulozi kimusebezi waluna Ona mwasifera mo mono sapina yabo kuna ni pina yebule yakubulozi sebenzi wala amu yeme basiza namu yeme bachima bulozi kimsebenzi wala kimsebenzi mani msebenzi waluna tuona walusiyezili wali tuona wali kile kujiseza pili Yeta nini alukazwa la pili kubala malena abona kona msebezi wa number 1 kikutwela kuitwanisi number 2 kikukala kuipepa akunasi chavasa vatu vavasaitwanisi vavaipepa vavasaipusi mwasi chavasa vatu vavaipusa ipuzo zeze mubulezi will be relevant actually. Konalu saizili kazeo zetalu. Lukabuza unalipuzo lefu ya kui. Aluka livelela kulimna msebezi waka etuka limela pea bla. Boku manenga mwelela tabayo. Nintena bata kuyo mwababa shopie mwamu. Ani ofita mfumani kulikuna nima customers wale wapata niliwele yo ukeni uzopena yo mumu ukeni uzopena ani okena baba ubulema umwe tabaru na yeye sama elaka Semula kulitabai. Wakarakuwa waseka nani zibasikuwa. Teza siwo zakabula ubuyele kulikitaba mani. Sinkuliona yale. But ubuyele aliyo kumuka saipunya. Kono ni for wipunya not direct. Uli mwindi mashemi balu nafali balu kutiseza mwamula. Wena. Niende outside your barber shop for 1 hour. Customer ya hao wa pili wambozi niye na mwasi wena. Customer hao wa uveri wambozi niye na mwasi nyanyi. Fase nitile lipina zeo za mulimu zelila. Mwa barber shop ya hao akizasiros. Chali adiko nikuwa mbola za kuli baba mbaezali kama. Unibulelele kuya. Kimusebezi manofu obata kulozayo ya tukuose na mane. Nina na rumela na niwe. Kono pili nibata kuli next time anikata. Mtofu manakuli wenake olukuwa barber shop ya hao. Anikafu manakuli olukuzi ka barber shop ka hao. Then choe kona ruka mbola kwa mandoro ama mwamunguluka olukuwa. Kona lukako na kutatuwa kana bashefu balu na baizali kama esinji bakato okuhanisa kulukula baba shop ya hao kona kuli na message yaka kuli musevezi wa bulozi kiwaluna kiwamanyi ni mani waluna. There is too much expectation of other people to do the work. There is too much satisfaction for pointing out what other people have failed. There is very little looking in the mirror, each one of us. What are you doing? I'm glad kudimweze rezi abo kesi abo afunda. Ni nani utuleta wayo kudawake. Nani wapotezi. Kona kudi. Kuwapotera is one of the minimum things you'll kona kwe. Kuwafepa wengi mwatorongo ki minimum you'll kona kwe. Kuzibisa waba mkuli batu walu na waba nyanda. Niyo na yo kimusevezi walu. Konesi niku wazibisa pera lunange lunipera. Nilu na lutumane zolu ikone la pataba yo. I believe and I demand, and I'm not starting now, in the freeing of all political prisoners. Whether they are Angela Davis in America, whether they are Kaunda under Chiluba, whether they are Fumba in the present day, I demand the release of political prisoners. Whether it's Mwabulos, whether it's Zambia, whether it's Africa, whether it's in the world. Because injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Yes. Okay. Luba pela ruwe, mazoma tonga mawala pela.
Okay, wow.
Baba sky na ande bako na kumana kutisali kula zabo na kuli babone kwa.
Yeah, so much, Doctor.